Hey guys, tonight we're sneaking behind the castle walls to explore something downright bizarre, medieval sleep habits. Imagine drifting off in a cold stone chamber, only to be woken up a few hours later for some strange nocturnal ritual that would make even the most dedicated nap fans squirm. Medieval folks didn't quite master the art of an 8-hour snooze. Instead, they embraced a patchwork of shattered rest, middle-of-the-night prayers, and bizarre routines that probably left their neighbors thinking they were cursed. So, before you dismiss your insomnia as modern woes, let me ask, did people in castles really sleep like a wall-mounted suit of armor? Hit like if you love weird history. Drop a comment telling me your strangest sleep habit. And buckle up, this is going to get weird. Dim the lights, settle in, and let's uncover how our ancestors caught ZZZs in the Dark Ages. In the quiet whispers of the 12th century monastery, Brother Aldrich's eyes, fresh with curiosity, took in the unfamiliar sight of staggered sleep schedules. Some monks curled on straw mats near the fireplace, others lingering in a half-doze while seated in corners. The walls echoed with the faint rustle of worn robes and the slow, deliberate breathing of men who seemed to share a collective, unspoken rhythm. It was a peaceful yet perplexing arrangement, a quiet testament to their attempt to reconcile rest with the relentless demands of prayer and work. As Aldrich observed, the simple act of sleeping became an act of communal patience, oddly intertwined with the spiritual discipline. The air was thick with the faint scent of hay and wax, and the evening's last light cast long shadows that flickered softly against the bare stone walls. But as the days grew longer, a subtle tension surfaced in these nightly customs. Monks sometimes missed their turn for the first watch prayers, instead drifting into unplanned naps that left their faces blurred with sleep. Sometimes the community's rhythm faltered, a gentle disarray in the quiet choreography of rest. Brother Aldrich noticed small signs, an eyelid lowering too heavily, a muffled yawn shared between unseen figures, implying that sleep was little more than an unruly guest in their ordered lives. Ironically, the sacred prayers doubled as communal naps, blending devotion with fatigue, making one wonder whether the monks truly found spiritual solace or merely exhausted humility. The ritual's oddity persisted quietly, as if the monastery itself was patiently accommodating their little human failures. A sort of mundane humor emerged quietly within these routines. Monks sitting in perfect silence, eyes shut, shoulders relaxed, but faces faintly amused by the absurdity of it all. Some would drift into this brief repose with a resigned sigh, their features blurred by the flickering torchlight, as if surrendering to their own imperfection. The first watch prayers, which were meant as sacred vigil, had degenerately become a communal convenience, often interrupted only by the soft sound of snoring or the scrape of a wooden cup on stone. Here, in this slow, sleepy world, discipline was a fragile, weary matter, humans resting when they could, living with their minor flaws amid the quiet dignity of their unremarkable routines. Even the prophets, seen only as fleeting shadows or blurred silhouettes, seemed quietly amused by these communal slips. Over time, as the monks grew accustomed to their unconventional sleep pattern, a serene calmness settled, an acceptance of the small imperfections that made their community gently human. The staggered beds and shared straw mats created a mosaic of resting bodies, each in a different state of drift, yet all part of the same slow, silent prayer. The tentative peace was marked by the soft whispers of breath and the faint shifting of coarse cloth as sleep meandered through their lives. Brother Aldrich sometimes wondered if, amid these oddly synchronized naps and bits of whispered prayer, there was a kind of collective meditation in surrendering to simply being tired, yet still striving. The sanctuary of sleep and wakefulness blurred quietly at the edges, becoming a gentle testament to their human endurance and shared humility. In the end, Aldrich understood that these strange routines were more than mere quirks. They echoed a fundamental truth about human life. That rest is fragile, often interrupted by the necessary chaos of being alive. The monk's nightly counsel, half prayer, half repose, illustrated an unvarnished human spirit trying to find stillness amid the restless demands of the day. Time had worn their customs softly, leaving behind a landscape of simple rituals and imperfect harmony. As Aldrich lay in his assigned corner, listening to the faint, uneven breathing of his brethren, he saw that perhaps the true spirituality was found not in perfect rest or rigid discipline, but in accepting the small, sleepy gaps where life's quiet humor dwells. And so, in this ancient, modest monastery, sleep and wakefulness continued their slow, gentle dance, a timeless human pause in the steady passage of days. In a quiet medieval village, the arrival of Lady Isolde, a traveling physician with a weathered leather bag and a keen eye, signaled a moment of curiosity. She watched the monks settle into their routine of sleep, noting how they appeared to drift into a deep, almost measured kind of rest, yet distinctly divided into two parts, what they called their first sleep and second sleep. Between these phases, they sat in the small cloister's shadows, sharing stories, whispering prayers, or simply sitting in contemplative silence. The cool air held a gentle weight as dawns and dusks blurred, and her notes documented this biphasic rhythm with a faint smile. The monks seemed unbothered, as if this peculiar cycle was just another quiet corner of life's steady flow, unworthy of much fuss. However, news of her observations traveled slowly, and with it came whispers of doubt and tradition's insistence that sleep was to be complete, whole, unbroken, as in the days of old. Soon a rival village, less interested in the modern stranger's insights, adopted a bizarre habit, sleeping upright against cold stone walls, with heads leaning and backs stiff, supposedly to keep spirits at bay, or to wake quickly for nocturnal duties. The villagers, frowning with sleepy eyes, claimed it was a safeguard against evil and a testament to their resilience. Tensions grew subtle but palpable, as each side wondered silently about the other's wisdom, their routines woven into the fabric of local identity and old superstitions. The simple act of sleep transformed into a symbol of faith and fear, softly dividing communities that shared a common landscape. The irony was not lost on Lady Isolde, who found her meticulous notes, now dotted with sketches of sleeping monks and upright villagers, lives intertwined with odd habits that seemed to defy common sense, yet persisted stubbornly. She recorded the soft sounds of breathing, the occasional muffled snore, and the strange silence of those upright sleepers pressed against stone walls, their legs stretched out or crossed, as if lounging in a waking dream. She noted how the villagers nodded in collective unawareness of the absurdity, how routine and belief had quietly wedged themselves into the data she sought to understand. The differences became weightless, almost humorous, yet held a quiet power within their quiet persistence, a testament to human comfort with the unfamiliar and the absurd. As days turned into quiet weeks, Lady Isolde's observations fostered a gentle calm in her thoughts. She realized that sleep, much like human tradition, was a subtle act of surrender, fragile, flawed, yet instinctively connected to the rhythms of daily life. The monks' divided sleep patterns brought a softer appreciation for how humans carve a slumbering space within their routines, even if that space is split or unorthodox. The villagers' upright slumber, once seen as bizarre, seemed to embody a stubborn hope, a holding onto old ways amid changing times. The blurred faces of prophets, glimpsed faintly in her notes, served as silent witnesses to this quiet human resilience, forever tucked into the margins of history's slow arc. A kind of peaceful acceptance settled over her, recognizing that sleep, like human customs, quietly endures amidst the gentle absurdities of life. Under the gentle waning evening light, the stories of biphasic sleep and upright resting settled into peaceful memory, less as questions than as whispering echoes of simpler worlds. The villagers continued their routines, and the monks' divided nights became less a subject of study and more a quiet acknowledgement of life's imperfect rhythm. Lady Isolde, her notes now filled with understated truths, understood that human beings hold onto their quirks with a kind of tender perseverance, like wrapped bundles of old stories and habits. The sleepy villages, the monks' whispers, and the upright sleepers, all folded into the quiet fabric of history, an enduring testament to the strange, quiet poetry of human sleep. In the quiet corners of medieval monasteries, the monks often found themselves lingering in moments of stillness after prayer, their eyes drifting shut amid the flickering candlelight. Some began to notice that within the dark hours, their minds spun vivid images, faint glowing scenes that seemed to flicker like fragile tapestries weaving themselves in the shadows. These visions, seemingly born from their wakeful moments, prompted a quiet curiosity, perhaps the mind's way of stitching memory and mystery together during the deep sleep's retreat. It was during these long nights that they started to craft what they called dream tapestries, delicate fabrics spun from the fleeting images of their visions, which they hung in their minds like silent, embroidered windows. The boundary between waking and sleeping subtly blurred, and an unspoken sense of wonder settled over the silent chambers, as if sleep itself had become a creative act worthy of careful, almost sacred attention. As seasons changed and villagers grew more attuned to the peculiar rhythm of their nights, a new, strange custom emerged, experimenting with what they began to call night cooking. In the absence of artificial light, families would gather around small fires or flickering candles, preparing meals in the dark, trusting their hands and senses rather than sight. When dawn finally stretched across the sky, these strange pre-dawn feasts were often found half-eaten and messy, with bread and vegetables smelling earthy and wild. This ritual stirred quiet discord. Some saw it as an abandonment of sleep's sanctity, an invasion of night's restful domain by noisy lanterns and meddlesome hands. Others, however, regarded it as a harmless curiosity, a moment of quiet rebellion woven into the fabric of their nightly routines. And so, the villages quietly whispered about these midnight rituals, as if sleep itself had become a shared secret, unspoken but lingering in the cool dawn air. Inevitably, irony softened into a kind of gentle humor, as the villagers and monks alike began to realize the absurdity of their nocturnal experiments. The monks, with their delicate dream tapestries, would sometimes hang their woven visions beside the messy remnants of midnight meals, side by side on the same stone walls. The contrast was quietly amusing, a tapestry of illusions spun from sleep's fragile whimsy, tangled awkwardly with the still steaming bowls and scratched wooden spoons of their dark kitchen conspiracies. Prophets' faces, always blurred and shadowed, watched this strange dance from afar, their unseen presence a distant hum beneath the absurdity. Life, it seemed, was stitched together in small, simple acts, imagining dreams in quiet, sophisticated silence, only to be interrupted by the clatter of plates and sleepy chatter. It was a modest comedy, woven into the slow fabric of daily life, reminding all that even sacred rituals and strange habits are tinged with human imperfection. In the calm hours that followed, after the last whisper of midnight and the first hue of dawn, a sense of peaceful resignation settled over the communities. The dream tapestries and the midnight feasts became quiet fixtures, woven into the rhythm of their days and nights, neither wholly embraced nor wholly abandoned. Slowly, the villagers and monks began to reflect on these habits with a muted, introspective humor, acknowledging their strange pursuits as small, human idiosyncrasies that added color to the endless cycle of sleep and wakefulness. Faces washed with morning light appeared softer, less serious, as they shared stories of visions and midnight meals beside the same humble hearth. With a gentle patience, they understood that these moments, no matter how odd, were quietly woven into the tapestry of their collective existence, ephemeral threads in the slow, gentle fabric of medieval life. And so, history drifts onward like a faint breeze through fading twilight, carrying subtle tales of curious human dreams and midnight experiments. These quiet episodes remind us that even in the most earnest pursuits, whether weaving visions or preparing unseen meals, people simply try to find comfort in their routines. Imperfect, yet heartfelt, the blurred faces of prophets continue to watch, perhaps amused by human folly, perhaps quietly approving of the modest acts of creativity and rebellion. In the end, these strange sleep habits linger in memory, not as grand stories, but as small, human nuances, whispered gently through time, waiting for the next slow, sleepy chapter. In the slow hours of the medieval village, there was a quiet certainty that everyone would sleep soundly each night, wrapped in the familiar rhythm of candles flickering and hearths cooling. But one dawn, villagers and monks alike awoke exhausted and restless, their eyes no longer fluttering shut with comfort. Whispers of a mysterious ailment spread, softly unraveling the tapestry of their nighttime routines, as if sleep itself had become an elusive stranger. The familiar hum of crickets and the soft rustle of straw in beds became suddenly alien sounds, endured in a fog of collective confusion. Amidst the dazed villagers and monks, a gentle tension emerged. Some mumbled about curses, others about bad air, but all felt the weight of something unspoken creeping through the quiet night's seams. As nights stretched into elongated stretches of wakefulness, worry grew like a slow-burning fire beneath aging roof beams. Monks in their cloisters muttered prayers that no longer brought peace. Villagers smoothed their blankets while staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that refused to arrive. Rumors fluttered through the streets, pointing fingers at magical charms or unspoken sins. Yet no explanation satisfied the shared disquiet. Ironically, the more they tried to understand the disturbance, the more distant sleep seemed like a cherished memory slipping through their fingers. The tapestries hanging on the monastery walls, usually vivid with stories and dreams, now hung stiff and silent, their colors faded, much like the collective patience of the townsfolk. In the muted dawn, it became clear that ordinary remedies, herbs, charms, even bread soaked in honey, failed to soothe the restless minds and bodies. A strange absurdity hung in the air. People, once steadfast in their routines, now wandered aimlessly, clutching empty cups or smoothing their nightgowns, as if expecting sleep to stumble back into their lives. The community's quiet panic sharpened the irony of the scene, how fragile sleep was, despite centuries of tradition and ritual. Among the murmuring crowd, Brother Aldrich and Lady Isolde, both exhausted and slightly bemused, realized that conventional wisdom offered little help, leaving the problem hanging like a faint shadow over the town. Their shared look was tired, but quietly determined to find some peace amid the silent chaos. A calm gradually settled over the village as days passed, and the villagers learned to accept the strange, lingering insomnia with a kind of weary patience. Brothers and ladies resumed their gentle daily routines, fetching water, tending to gardens, sharing simple meals, all tinged with a faint sense of resignation. Brother Aldrich, with his cracked leather prayer book, and Lady Isolde, sitting beneath a low-hanging oak, began to piece together a modest theory. Perhaps sleep was less about ritual and more about the delicate balance of a community's unwritten trust. Whispered conversations centered less on cures and more on simple human endurance, a quiet reminder that sometimes just waiting was enough. And in this slow acceptance, the nightly air grew softer, as if the village itself was gently resigning to a strange, shared lullaby. Looking back, the villagers learned one quiet lesson: that sleep, like many human things, is a fragile gift, easily disturbed by unseen currents and collective impatience. The mysterious illness eventually ebbed away, leaving behind only the memory of restless nights and the shared irony of trying to control something as naturally elusive as dreams. Brother Aldrich and Lady Isolde sitting side by side under the still evening sky, reflected on the strange silence that had fallen over their lives. Once more, the tapestries on the monastery walls seemed to settle into their stories, colors returning faintly with the returning comfort of sleep. However reluctant it might be, perhaps in the end, the village's greatest strength was simply waiting patiently, quietly, as humans always do, and trusting that dawn would eventually come, even after the longest, sleepless night. Long ago, in the quiet hours of the medieval night, people slept in two distinct phases. First, a deep, uninterrupted rest as darkness fell, then a waking period that was often mere silence before the dawn. The flickering glow of candlelight cast gentle shadows on simple beds, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of breathing and the occasional distant dog. This fragmented sleep pattern, woven into daily life, seemed natural enough until a new idea quietly took hold, suggesting that perhaps the human body might benefit from a different rhythm. They considered the possibility that something in the night could be reimagined, an order that might bring peace to restless minds and weary bodies alike, as the concept of restoring a single, continuous sleep gained gentle curiosity. Some monks and villagers began experimenting with embracing the night's darkness differently. In the monasteries, a ritual emerged, an almost sacred midpoint, where the first sleep would softly dissolve into quiet wakefulness. During this shared midnight hush, they would sing a simple hymn, an unspoken prayer to reunite the two halves of their rest. For many, this midnight hymn became a symbol of hope, a moment of calm for minds troubled by insomnia or restless worry, as if the very act of singing in unison could coax the night into a softer, more forgiving shape. Yet modern observers might find it quietly comic that in their efforts to tame the night, some villagers resorted to risky midnight cooking. Blazing fires and boiling pots that flickered shadows into the dark. The glow from their hearths sometimes pierced the night's calm unexpectedly, disturbing neighbors and risking small fires fueled by hurried, half-asleep hands. Meanwhile, the monks' choir mellowed into a serene routine. No more abrupt awakenings, just a gentle dissolution of sleep into wakefulness, and then back again as dawn approached. An irony settled quietly. In attempting to refine their sleep, humans still clung to habits that sometimes disturbed the very peace they sought. With practice, the community's rhythm found a subtle, peaceful balance, their nights gently unified by shared rituals and less hazardous routines. The villagers gradually abandoned risky nighttime activities, and the monk's hymn became a calming anchor, an invisible thread weaving their sleepless hours into a calm and harmonious whole. The early dawn stretched softly across the horizon, its light revealing empty beds and the slow stir of awakening bodies. Almost unnoticeably, the idea that sleep could be a single, restful voyage persisted, blending into their ordinary lives as a quiet, enduring truth, an understanding that bedtime was less a division and more a continuous embrace of day and night. In that peaceful dawn, with the sky softly deepening into a gentle blue, the story of their unconventional sleep habits seemed to settle like a distant, fond memory. Human beings, with all their imperfections and small absurdities, singing hymns in the dead of night, risking fires, and waking to greet the day, found a kind of calm in their routines. Perhaps, beneath all the ritual and irony, there was a silent acknowledgement. The human need for rest is stubborn, mysterious, and slightly humorous in its endless pursuit. And as the first light spilled quietly over rooftops and fields, it carried with it the enduring, if quietly worn, wisdom that sometimes the greatest peace comes not from perfect routines, but from simply continuing to sleep, in whatever form it takes. In the quiet stone corridors of St. Ephrem Abbey, young Brother Anselm first learned the slow, deliberate cycle of daily monastic life. The mornings greeted him with the faint smell of damp wood and the soft clatter of his fellow novices preparing for prayer, their faces mostly hidden beneath hoods. As dawn stretched into a pale light, he watched the older monks settle into their routines, chanting, sweeping, drinking simple tea, each movement purposeful and unhurried. The abbey's shadows lengthened, and the rhythm of quiet work lulled him into a sense that time was both long and very small, just enough to hold their breathing and hopes. Everything seemed to hum with a gentle, unspoken promise. Later there would be prayer, and then perhaps rest, in this slow cycle of human effort and devotion. One morning, the abbot gathered the novices with a calm voice that felt like the soft roll of distant thunder, announcing that a new decree was to be put into effect. They would keep a midnight vigil, watching through the silent hours of the night. Brother Anselm thought of midnight as a distant point, an unspoken boundary between sleep and waking, light and shadow. Yet suddenly, it felt like a weight pressed gently onto their shared routine. The nights would be different now. The cloister's familiar darkness would be broken up by quiet figures standing still, eyes turned inward or perhaps outward, waiting for something unseen. The idea of shifting their sleep, even slightly, brought a wave of mild curiosity combined with a faint, ironic apprehension. After all, what more could be revealed in the stillness of that half-dark? The monks set their shoulders to the change, as if each moving part of the night was just another quiet step in their long, modest procession. As night fell on their first vigil, the monks shuffled into the shadowed cloister, their robes brushing softly against the cold stone, faces partially obscured beneath small hoods that seemed to blend into the dark. Brother Anselm found his posture stiff with sleepiness, yet strangely alert in a way that made the shadows flicker and dance. The unfamiliar quiet was filled with the faint rustle of breath and the distant, indistinct tick of a clock, perhaps merely the cathedral's ancient mechanism. Some monks sat quietly, eyes half closed. Others stood motionless like statues, lost in the gentle irony that they were awake for something as intangible as hope or patience. The dark felt both endless and fleeting, as if the night could stretch infinitely or fold into the next breath. It was a small, shared act of patience. Keep watch, stay still, and wait. Over time, the vigil settled into a slow, contemplative rhythm, an almost imperceptible dance shared by the monks in their quiet postures. Anselm found himself less preoccupied with the ticking of the clock and more attuned to the subtle variations in the darkness, how the shadows beneath the arches grew softer, how the monks' faces softened with sleep and age. Sometimes a faint glow from a candle or the reflection of moonlight on the cold stone prompted a moment's pause, a silent exchange of the smallest, most human gestures. In these moments, the irony became clearer. The night, which once seemed an adversary of sleep and rest, now held moments of stillness that felt strangely warm, almost tender in their quiet endurance. The solemnity of the vigil seemed to fold into the very stones of the cloister, becoming part of its remembered silence. Eventually, Anselm reflected that these midnight watches, humble and understated, were less about divine mystery than about human persistence. The simple act of staying awake through the darkness, with all its imperfections and fleeting thoughts, the silent hours, once seemingly insurmountable, had become a gentle routine, a shared quiet that connected them beyond words. The blurred faces of saints, unseen by their eyes, had faded into the shadows, leaving behind only the soft glow of their modest efforts. Perhaps, in the end, the ritual was less about watching for some distant salvation and more about learning to sit patiently within oneself in the slow dance of night and dawn. The monks' quiet vigilance, like the slow turning of a great, distant wheel, reminded them that even in stillness there is a kind of human warmth, an enduring, if faintly humorous, testament to the simple passage of time. As twilight drains from the stone walls of the monastery, the aging monks gather silently in the cold, dimly lit choir. Their movements are slow, almost absorbed by the weight of the coming night, as they settle onto their wooden stools with small, habitual gestures, the faint crackle of candle wicks, flickering answers to the distant calls of night creatures beyond narrow windows. In this quiet, the purpose is clear: to turn the dark hours into a time of prayer, a deliberate pause in the relentless march of day. Yet within this routine, a gentle sense of anticipation and weariness dances quietly, inevitable as the shadows lengthening outside. With the first chime of midnight, the monks' faces often flicker into sharper focus, shadows playing across their features as they grapple with the gloom that seems to press closer. Anselm, the youngest, sits stiffly, eyes darting around, murmuring doubts to himself amid the murmured psalms. The cold infiltrates their bones, and even the candlelight seems insufficient against the thick darkness that blankets their small universe. Outside, a thin wind rattles the shutters. No spirits, merely the quiet, unhurried noise of the night. Yet the monks remain vigilant, lassoed by a mixture of faith and fatigue that makes the shadows seem alive, whispering secrets that beckon just beyond reach. Somewhere between solemnity and irony, the older brother Cormac chuckles softly at the presumption of fearing the darkness, recalling legends whispered in the cloister's dusk, stories of angels with gentle wings guiding lost souls, and flickering lights in the abyss. In their shared quiet humor, there's a bittersweet acknowledgement of human silliness, of how these stories serve as both comfort and irony, framing an endless night of quiet desperation. Anselm pauses, eyes meeting brother Cormac's, realizing that even prayer can be tinged with a subtle humor about how little they truly control. Their hushed laughter, barely audible, mingles with the crackling candle, both a defiance and a gentle surrender of the night's weight. As the hours slowly pass, the atmosphere eases into a calm that feels ancient and inescapable. The flickering flame is now a steady glow, and the monks, acknowledging the sameness of night after night, sometimes drift into moments of quiet reflection, small gestures like adjusting their robes or sighing softly. Outside, the world remains still, waiting silently, as if acknowledging their labor in the darkness without comment. Their faces, blurry and calm, carry the marks of many such vigils, faint lines that speak of patience and a quiet resilience. In this stillness, the night becomes a lullaby of small human routines, as if sleep itself is a distant shore calling gently with little urgency. In the slow dawn that eventually seeps through the tiny windows, the monks emerge from their vigil with measured movements, eyes half-lidded, but somehow more contemplative. The shadows retreat, and the day begins to creep into their awareness, mundane yet profound in its persistence. They carry the quiet wisdom that all nights, no matter how dark or restless, eventually give way to light, just as human effort continues in the face of fleeting doubts and humor. The legends of nocturnal angels and midnight spirits linger softly in their minds, blurred by the daylight, reminders of small, countless human attempts to find meaning in the slow, silent passage of time. And as they tend to their simple chores, the monks quietly acknowledge, perhaps it is the routine, more than the darkness, that offers the greatest comfort in the end. As night settled quietly over the monastery, a faint glow from the monks' candles danced along stone walls, marking the beginning of their midnight vigil. The ritual was a familiar routine. Soft prayers hummed in unison, and the gentle flicker of flames cast shifting shadows on weary faces. Outside, the world was hushed, only interrupted by the distant sounds of wind stirring leaves. An ordinary, almost peaceful scene that had persisted for centuries. Still, beneath that calm, there was a subtle sense of anticipation, an awareness that this night might reveal something slightly different. In these moments, the monks' shared quietness felt like a small act of defiance against the darkness outside, a testament to their quiet commitment to the unseen, unbroken chain of tradition. Suddenly, a sharp gust of wind rattled the small, narrow windows and snuffed out a few candles, leaving the chamber briefly cloaked in shadows that felt a little less familiar. The storm crept in with a low rumble that echoed softly through the thick stone walls, isolating the abbey in a way that made well-worn routines seem a little more fragile. A wandering hermit, muddy and silent, appeared at the open door, his presence unexpectedly tipping the carefully balanced evening into a quiet moment of tension. The monks paused, exchanging uncertain glances as he challenged their purpose with a simple, placid stare, an uninvited interruption that yet somehow felt woven into the night's slow, inexorable rhythm. Anselm, the senior monk, shifted in his seat and gently cleared his throat, sensing that the ritual now depended on what would come next. With the hermit's words hanging in the air, almost comically mundane, yet oddly provocative, one of the younger monks almost chuckled, until Anselm raised his hand softly, signaling patience. Instead of dismissing the outsider, he began a spontaneous chant, minutes slipping away as his voice merged with the faint wind, turning possible discord into a steady, gentle song. The flickering candles, now a little steadier, cast a warm glow that seemed to swallow moments of awkwardness with their quiet persistence. The hermit listened, eyes shadowed by a worn hood, and slowly an amused smirk softened his face. It was as if the patience of the monks, their simple act of singing into the unfamiliar, transformed uncertainty into something oddly reassuring, a small victory of calm over chaos. As the storm rumbled on softly outside, the abbey settled again into its contemplative stillness. The unexpected interruption unwound into a quiet story of resilience. The flickering candles, now resilient against the wind's attempt to extinguish them, cast a warm, amber light that seemed to soften even the rough edges of the hermit's midnight visit. The monks resumed their silent prayers, their movements slow and familiar, as if the fleeting tension had been just a small ripple in the eternal calm of their nightly vigil. Anselm looked around with a quiet smile, recognizing the value in these imperfect moments. How a simple act of kindness or patience could turn uncertainty into a shared, if fragile, moment of peace. It was, perhaps, the quiet truth of all their nights, that even amidst storms and strangers, the essence of their ritual endured, not as perfection, but as persistence. Later, as dawn threatened the edges of the dark sky, the monks lowered their candles and prepared to leave the vigil behind for a new day. The storm had passed, leaving only the faint scent of rain and the soft sound of dripping water in the stone corridors. The hermit had vanished as quietly as he arrived, leaving behind no more than a ghost of a smile, and the memory of a night where patience turned an ordinary vigil into a tiny act of human resilience. Anselm sat quietly, reflecting on the night's simple lesson, that even in the quietest moments, human imperfection, resilience, and a touch of irony weave themselves into the fabric of their shared life. These moments, he thought, are what keep the ritual alive, nothing grand, merely human, and quietly enough that it barely stirs the sleep of time. As dusk settled over the quiet monastery, the monks prepared for their nightly vigil with slow, deliberate motions, lighting simple candles, folding their cloaks, and settling onto worn stone benches. The evening light waned, casting long shadows through small windows, giving the chapel an air of peaceful routine. Behind their calm faces, there was an unspoken understanding that this nightly act of prayer was both necessity and tradition, a gentle anchor against the unceasing flow of time. No fanfares, just the soft rustle of robes and the faint scrape of wooden beads as they began to settle into the expected silence. It was an ordinary moment, imbued with a quiet dignity that stretched through the centuries, a ritual that made the endless night feel somewhat less unyielding. As seconds stretched into minutes, the weather outside grew restless. A wind whistled through gaps. Rain tapped faintly on the stained glass, and distant thunder muttered in the darkness. The monks' voices, barely above a murmur, continued their slow cadence, echoing faintly off the stone walls. Inside, a certain tension flickered, an awareness of the storm's fury that seemed to seep through the chapel's thick walls, stirring a small but persistent anxiety. One or two monks shifted in their seats, their brows faintly knit, but no one broke the silence or hurried the prayer. The storm's chaos contrasted sharply with the solemn, unwavering focus of the vigil, each heartbeat echoing in the shared, quiet resistance to the tempest's roar outside. Somewhere amid the rhythmic monotony, a faint irony emerged. How the monks, in their earnest desire for spiritual clarity, had turned an ancient midnight prayer into a nightly endurance contest. The weather raged on, yet the monks persisted, their collective breath slow, and even almost as if trying to match the storm's slow, relentless pulse. A particularly loud crack of thunder caused a minor startle, moments later met with an almost bored sigh from a young novice, who wondered silently if weather and prayer had both become routines to be endured with equal patience. It was a quiet acknowledgement that even sacred acts could drift into the realm of daily habit, tinged with just a hint of human imperfection. The storm outside remained unyielding, while inside, the monk's focus showed a faint weariness, as if repeating a story that had long since lost its dramatic edge. Eventually, as if responding to the steady, undramatic prayers, the storm outside seemed to slow its violent dance, the rain softening to a delicate patter, and the wind easing into a gentle whisper. The flickering candles cast a softer glow, blending with the last streaks of moonlight slipping through stained glass, creating a calm that seeped into the very bones of the chapel. The collective breath of the monks relaxed, and their eyes, now half closed, reflected a shared serenity born from endurance and patience. For a moment, the world outside and within seemed to align, still, quiet, and mildly amused by the human effort to find peace amid chaos. The ritual had, perhaps, become a meditative act in its own humble way, a slow affirmation that even storms could be soothed, if only momentarily, by simple, steadfast prayer. Later, in the hushed aftermath, a luminous impression appeared in the stained glass, an ephemeral glow that seemed to softly affirm the importance of the night vigil. The monks, gazing upward, noticed the faint distortion of the usual biblical figures, blurred and veiled by the gentle light, their faces just hints beneath the glowing surface. The storm had passed, leaving a calm that lingered like a tired sigh. The monks' minds drifted to the centuries of such nights, storms of conscience, storms of doubt, and how quiet rituals quietly stitched them together through the passage of time. Perhaps, they thought lazily, the storm and the prayer both rest within the same long, slow dance, one outside, one within each, patiently awaiting the dawn of another day, with a mixture of hope and weary resignation. As night settled quietly over the stone walls of the abbey, The monks prepared themselves for the ritual that would mark the deepening hours. Candles flickered faintly, casting gentle shadows on rough-hewn wooden tables, while the distant hum of a do dee continued unnoticed. The monks, clad in simple robes, moved with slow, practiced motions, settling into their places for the midnight vigil. A tradition slowly solidified through generations of quiet devotion. Outside, the sky darkened, a clear reminder that this was a space where time seemed to hesitate, caught between the night and the promise of dawn. It was an ordinary yet fragile moment, marked by the hum of breath and the soft rustle of fabric as they watched and waited. As midnight drew near, the silent tension in the room thickened slightly, an unspoken acknowledgement of how deeply human routines can become rituals. The candle's flame trembled, flickering in sync with the heartbeat of the slow, rhythmic prayers that filled the space. A monk's hand lingered on an ancient scroll, eyes half closed, trying to summon meaning in the flickering shadows, while a younger brother shuffled slightly, fighting sleep's gentle teasing. Outside, the clouds drifted across the sky, obscuring any sense of divine certainty. Inside, the monks felt the weight of their own perseverance, turning fleeting moments into ongoing commitments. However mundane they appeared, the irony was subtle. The ritual's beauty lay in its monotony, binding them to a shared, unremarkable hours that felt oddly sacred. As the hours dragged on, the vigil's solemnness seemed to soften into gentle irony. What once was an act of profound devotion now took on a quiet, almost mundane persistence. A brother stifled a yawn behind a hand, while another carefully adjusted his hood, as if these small gestures might somehow preserve the sanctity of the night. The flickering candles cast soft, amber glows that seemed to mock the seriousness of their purpose, reminding them of the simplicity of human routine. Sleep promised, yet hesitated. Outside, a breeze brushed against the walls, carrying with it a hint of dawn's distant promise. Yet the monks remained rooted to their vigil, trapped in a slow dance of obligation and irony's gentle whisper. In this calm, the night's quiet absurdity was both comfort and irony. They were caught in a ritual whose significance hovered just beyond reach. When the first faint light began to seep through the narrow windows, the room slowly relaxed, settling into a peaceful stillness that felt both deliberate and inevitable. The monks, now wearier, but somehow more contemplative, lowered their heads with a shared, silent acknowledgement that the longest night was nearing its end. The candles burned low, flickering as if in gentle farewell, their glow a soft testament to the persistence of tradition. Outside, the dawn's light stretched across the sky in simple shades of beige and terracotta. quietly asserting the promise of a new day. The vigil, with all its minute rituals and sleepy repetitions, had become a living memory, an unspoken testament to their faith in the ordinary. In this calm, one could sense the faint humor in their collective patience. They had turned a mundane night into a quiet act of devotion, each small motion carrying its own weight and its own subtle irony. Reflecting on this ancient ritual, it becomes clear that the midnight vigil was not just about prayer, but also about human endurance in its most gentle, unassuming form. Anselm, now a full brother, stood quietly at the edge of the rising light, a faint sense of pride flickering behind his blurred, shadowed face. He whispered softly to himself, vowing to pass this tradition into future generations, sealing their shared history into the slow, relentless rhythm of nights yet to come. The abbey, positioned between darkness and dawn, seemed to acknowledge this quiet renewal, a reminder that even the most repetitive acts can become part of something lasting, something just a little bit sacred in their ordinary human striving. As the sun finally broke through, casting a warm, gentle glow, the monks silently packed away their vigil, already preparing for the day ahead, an enduring testament to their modest, enduring devotion. In the quiet grandeur of Castle Aldermere, the stone walls echoed softly with anticipation as Sir Rowan, the newly appointed steward, arranged the details of the upcoming midnight feast. Candles flickered gently on long wooden tables, their flames casting a warm glow that shimmered across the faces of Lady Aloin and Lord Herrick, who sat patiently in their high-backed chairs. The bustling kitchen staff moved deliberately, stacking trays with bread and fruit, while the restless servants tiptoed through shadowy corridors, balancing dishes and whispers alike. There was a calm familiarity in these preparations, a slow rhythm rooted in centuries of tradition. Yet beneath it all, a faint thread of tension spun from the knowledge that everyone had a role to play in the evening's quiet spectacle. As midnight approached, a subtle shift drifted through the castle's great hall, where the feast was set to unfold. The air grew a little thicker with expectation, and the flickering candles seemed to dance more deliberately, as if aware of the significance. The noble hosts exchanged measured glances, their faces partially blurred in the dim light, while the servers moved with careful precision, their movements almost subliminal amid the soft murmur of voices and clinking of goblets. Yet amid the orchestrated calm, there lingered the faint presence of nervousness, hidden behind gentle smiles and steady hands, as everyone knew that the real challenge was yet to come, balancing celebration with the unseen watch of guards, already settling into their slow patrols. The irony of the midnight feast in this moment was that it was both a celebration and a quiet duty, a shared human absurdity that no matter how lavish or composed, everyone carried a secret awareness of their impermanence. Candles burned lower now, shadows stretching and shrinking across the tablecloths, while servants occasionally paused as if to listen for a distant sound, an unsteady step, a whisper that might disturb the fragile tranquility. Lady Eloin's face, partially obscured by a swirl of candlelight, carried a gentle smile that seemed to think about the fleeting nature of these hours, and how, in the end, they would all return to their separate chambers, waiting in silence for dawn. Here, behind the veneer of revelry, was the quiet irony of human life. That comfort and chaos often shared the same space, tucked into the shadows of the night. Gradually, the hall relaxed into a deeper calm. The buzz of activity slowed, and the flickering flames cast a soft amber glow that softened every face, every gesture. Servants moved with languid ease, clearing the remnants of food with unspoken resignation, while the noble hosts simply sat, their eyes glinting faintly with unspoken thoughts about duty, about the passage of time, about the quiet nights yet to come. The guards, now settled into their posts, observed the peaceful scene with a measured indifference that betrayed centuries of knowing how quickly tranquility could turn. And in this stillness, there was a kind of gentle wisdom that the true luxury was not the feast itself, but the rare moment when the castle's shadows grew long enough for everyone to breathe into the calm of knowing that tomorrow would come, quietly and without fuss. Reflecting on these slow hours, it becomes clear that the midnight feast of Castle Aldermere was more than mere ritual. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of human imperfection and fleeting moments of grace. The faces blurred by candlelight, the gentle sounds of shuffling feet and soft-spoken words, all wove together into a quiet tapestry of daily life's small absurdities. As dawn finally loomed beyond the castle walls, the night's stories quietly settled into memory, leaving behind only the subtle echoes of laughter and the faint smell of bread and wine. Behind it all, there was a gentle reminder that life, much like a midnight feast, is best enjoyed slowly, tasting its quiet layers and savoring the calm between the moments of noise. As the grand banquet reached its zenith in the softly illuminated hall, whispers of anticipation mingled with the gentle clatter of porcelain and silver. Servants in muted garb moved quietly between tables, laying out dishes that shimmered under candlelight, while outside the chamber, beneath the stone floors, a hidden passage lay undisturbed, silent, and beckoning. The castle's preparations had been meticulous, yet among the noble guests, a quiet tension simmered over a shipment of rare spices. believed to be the centerpiece of the evening's feast. Sir Rowan, with a deliberate gait, exchanged subtle glances with Mistress Bryn, the head cook, as a faint aroma hinting at the missing spice drifted through the air, unnoticed by many. The clock's slow, steady ticking seemed to underscore the moment's delicate patience, as everyone waited softly for the night to unfold without disruption. Suddenly, a subtle murmur grew into an almost inaudible dispute, echoing from the kitchens, voices strained and shrouded in the labyrinth of hidden corridors. Sir Rowan, known for his calm demeanor, found himself reluctantly guiding Mistress Bryn through the narrow, damp tunnels beneath the stone kitchens, their footsteps muffled on cold, uneven earth. Somewhere deep within, the clandestine exchange of the spice crate had gone awry, threatening to unravel the carefully woven fabric of continuity that the castle's guards and servants sought to uphold. Outside, the watchman's hurried footsteps tapped softly on the flagstones as they scrambled to synchronize the timing of the feast with Thales. Strict bedtime rituals of the nobles, each moment a quiet dance of control and restraint. Yet in their hurried movements, an almost humorous irony emerged. The very spices meant to elevate the night's meal now risked sowing disorder beneath the calm of the castle walls. As the minutes passed, the discrepancy in plans became evident quietly, almost comically so, highlighting the fragile human threads holding this night together. Mistress Bryn's hands, usually so steady and practiced, faltered slightly at the thought of losing the rare shipment. Sir Rowan's calm mask barely concealed a small, bemused smile at the absurdity of it all. Beneath the soft flicker of torches, the hidden corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, echoing with muffled voices and muted footsteps, an unintended stage for a minor, yet pointed irony that even in the midst of regal splendor and strict routines, human fallibility persisted quietly and humbly. Outside, the watchmen finally aligned the timing, adjusting their silent signals as the castle settled into a tentative calm. The spices, if recovered, promising a feast that would somehow carry on, undisturbed. Eventually, the tension eased, and the castle's quiet routines resumed like a soft tide, washing over the stone walls and echoing softly into the night. Sir Rowan and Mistress Bryn, somewhat amused by their clandestine adventure, stepped back into the warm glow of the grand hall, their faces touched by the faint blush of mild humor. The spices, safely retrieved or slightly delayed in delivery, would still find their way into the evening's feast, though perhaps not quite as planned. The tired watchmen resumed their posts, their eyes half closed, as if to reassure themselves that order, however fragile, had been maintained. Outside, The shadows of the castle stretched long and quiet, a reminder that beneath the surface of every bustling life, small disruptions are just part of the ordinary rhythm, coming quietly and fading, like a story drifting into sleep. In the gentle stillness that lingered after the night's minor turmoil, the castle settled into its customary calm, illuminated by soft lamplight and the distant hum of restful sleep. The narrow, hidden passage, once a site of quiet human effort, remained undisturbed, a humble testament to the subtle, often unnoticed work that keeps a place like this intact. Sir Rowan and Mistress Bryn, their roles quietly fulfilled, returned to their routines with a shared, knowing smile, each carrying a story of spice, corridors, and timing that would drift quietly into the background of daily life. As the castle's walls grew silent once more, it became clear that even the most noble of occasions rest on the small, unassuming threads of human imperfection, woven into the slow, gentle fabric of everyday existence. And somewhere, in the quiet shadows, the blurred face of an unseen prophet might have noticed, perhaps, that life, with all its minor follies, remains calmly enduring. In the quiet hours of a grand castle, the noble banquet had drawn to a close, leaving behind a faint aroma of roasted meats and fragrant herbs. Guests lingered at long, polished tables, their chatter soft but steady, while candlelight flickered gently against stone walls. Outside, a brief storm began to stir, its distant rumble barely interrupting the peaceful rhythm of the evening. The hosts, a little weary but satisfied, prepared for the night's rest, carefully considering their arrangements to ensure comfort for all. Yet amidst this calm, a small misstep quietly unfolded, an overlooked detail about the sleeping chambers that would later ripple through the night like a faint echo of discord. Suddenly, the wind picked up, and the castle's ancient torches flickered uncertainly, casting shadows that danced across the ornate halls. A messenger hurried in, breathless, with news that the storm had knocked out the castle's power. No lamps, no heating, just the natural darkness closing in. The noble family exchanged worried glances, but it was the confusion over the room assignments that brought about a more immediate challenge. Several visiting dukes found themselves without a designated chamber, their noble expectations abruptly unmet. The castle's steward scrambled through the dim corridors, speaking hurriedly in whispers, attempting to reassign rooms amid the flickering candle glow. Tension, subtle yet persistent, prickled through the evening air as plans recalibrated in a flurry of soft, spoken requests and reluctant concessions. As the night deepened, irony settled in like a slow, unwelcome guest. The very essence of the gathering, the supposed comfort and harmony, entangled in a web of overlooked details and half-formed plans. The visiting dukes, watching their hosts struggle with a weather-beaten map of rooms, exchanged knowing, slightly amused glances. Service servants, unseen, but present behind heavy curtains, moved quietly with a kind of gentle resignation, their small gestures tinged with mild humor at the human tendency to falter at small moments of chaos. The evening's veneer of majesty softened into a quiet comedy of errors, as everyone realized that even the most meticulous arrangements are prone to the gentle imperfection of human oversight. The storm's roar outside seemed distant now, a background hum to the still, soft hum of compromise inside. Gradually, the castle's atmosphere found a gentle, almost sleepy rhythm again. The lighting was dimmer. Shadows stretched across the stone floors in slow, lazy arcs. The bespoken panic lifted into a shrug of acceptance. A few chambers were shared, some corners rearranged, and the noble hosts offered small apologies with placid smiles. The miscommunication, once a source of rising tension, became part of the story, woven quietly into the tapestry of the night. For the attending guests, the inconvenience was little more than a faint ripple in the vast, slow stream of castle life, easily forgotten with a warm cup of mead, or the soft closing of a heavy door. In these moments, the absurdity of human effort rested gently, like a worn but familiar blanket, over the night's quiet imperfections. In the calm light of dawn, the castle seemed to breathe more easily, its stones settling into the long, quiet hours ahead. The storm had passed, leaving behind only a faint scent of dampness, and that peculiar peace that follows a restless night. The noble family, a little embarrassed, but clearly unruffled, reflected on the night's small chaos with a gentle smile. The flaws of human planning had once again revealed themselves as tender imperfections in the grand tapestry of life. The visiting dukes, now safely housed and refreshed, exchanged stories about the storm and the rooms, their faces blurred, but their eyes quietly amused reminders that even in the most solemn of settings, life's small errors compress into moments of quiet humor. And so, as life wove itself back into the slow, unremarkable rhythm of the castle, the subtle lesson lingered, that human effort, with all its flaws, is often enough if carried with patience and a sense of quiet grace. As night fell over the stone walls of the castle, the great hall was alive with the gentle hum of conversation and the shimmering glow of candlelight. Nobles in silk and velvet leaned over long tables laden with bread, meats, and fruits, their faces soft with contentment, and the distant jingle of goblets filled the air. Servants moved quietly among them, ensuring that every detail of the midnight feast was attended to with quiet precision. Outside, the wind carried a faint chill, but within these thick stone corridors, warmth and laughter persisted, inviting a sense of calm that enveloped both guest and host alike. It was a moment of peaceful excess, seemingly untouched by the outside world's slow passage into darkness. Then faint disturbance, a distant cracking sound, pierced the smooth rhythm of the evening, like a small crack in a mirror that suddenly gathers all the light around it. A gust of wind swept through a loose shutter, and through the weakened section of the outer wall, shadows appeared, creeping in like unwelcome guests. Nobles paused mid-chew, the silent realization flickering across their faces that something might be amiss. Guards reached for their lanterns and weapons, exchanging subtle glances that betrayed their own slight uncertainty. The lively warmth of the hall tensed as every whispered conversation slowed, and the atmosphere shifted from relaxed indulgence to cautious alert. Outside, the storm's growl seemed to echo a warning, an inevitable breach in the fortress of peace that had so carefully been maintained. The irony dawned quietly. While the feast celebrated abundance and human craftsmanship, a sudden crack in the defenses threatened those very boundaries, turning the merrymakers into wartime adversaries in a matter of moments. The marauders, silhouetted against the flickering torchlight, appeared almost comically unprepared for the seriousness of their intrusion, clumsy, driven by desperation, yet strangely persistent in their attempt to slip inside. The nobles, surprisingly, did not panic, but instead paused to assess. A servant behind a curtain chuckled slightly at the absurdity of it all, as if this was just another routine inconvenience. The guards formed a loose line, shields slightly askew, silent and practiced. Chaos, yes, but in a strange, muted way. It demonstrated human resilience amid failure, like a hurried dance on a well-worn stage. Slowly, the tension eased as the intruders, thwarted or exhausted, retreated into the shadows from which they had come, leaving only the faint echo of their footsteps in the corridors. The castle's inhabitants settled back into their positions, though the air remained tinged with a restrained vigilance. The great hall resumed its gentle hum, the flickering torchlight casting soft shadows across the faces that had momentarily registered fear, surprise, and perhaps a trace of humor. The noble hosts resumed their seats, exchanging knowing looks that suggested they had not forgotten the fragile balance between comfort and chaos. Outside, the storm subsided, the wind dying into a distant murmur, as if quietly ashamed of its earlier ferocity. In these quiet moments, the castle seemed both a sanctuary and a reminder of the thin line humans walk between stability and disorder. As dawn crept over the castle walls, the night's chaos dissolved into the slow, deliberate rhythm of day. The lingering traces of storm and conflict remained only in faint scars, a loosened shutter here, a remembered hurried step there. The noble banquet, now concluded, felt like a brief dream, imperfect, but oddly reassuring in its ordinariness. Servants began to clean the tables, their movements methodical and unhurried, while the nobles moved toward their chambers with small, knowing smiles that hinted at stories better left unsaid. The castle, like all human endeavors, bore the gentle weight of its own imperfections, quietly accepting them with a kind of quiet irony. And so, life trudged forward as it always did, carrying within it the soft humor of human folly and the persistent hope for peace, however fragile it might be. As dawn approached, the castle's great hall softened in the morning light, shadows slowly retreating from the flickering remnants of the night's feast. The long oak tables bore traces of honeyed figs and crumbs, silent witnesses to the quiet merriment that had briefly filled the stone chambers. Servants moved gently through the room, collecting dishes with softly clattering trays, while the nobles, still seated, exchanged murmurs about the storms and marauders that had tested their patience. An occasion that had, for all its chaos, cemented some fragile sense of unity. Outside, a faint chill seeped through the slightly open windows, but inside, warmth lingered, mingling with the bittersweet scent of leftover wine and roasted herbs. The faces of the special guests, the prophets now long disappeared behind veiled shadows, remained blurred and unseen, as if their presence was best remembered through hushed stories and vague impressions. As the last of the marauders retreated into the distance, the castle's bravado settled into a state of tentative calm. The sky outside was a dull gray, withholding the promise of sunlight, yet inside the chamber, the tension eased into a quiet patience. Nobles and attendants moved slowly, almost deliberately, aware that the night's upheaval had left behind fragile wreckage as well as quiet victories. Server staff, stiff with exhaustion but eager to reaffirm routine, prepared for the next day's tasks, reassigning sleeping chambers with soft, measured steps. The echoes of the storm clashed with the gentle clink of cups and the muffled footsteps of those navigating the aftermath. Even the prophets, their faces still obscured by muted light, seemed to acknowledge the unspoken truth that resilience often dwells in the mundane, overlooked moments. In the midst of the calm, a small tray of honeyed figs was brought forth, the last offering of sweetness from a night both ordinary and extraordinary. The nobles, gathered around a low table, paused to share this final course, their fingers brushing lightly against the wrinkled skins of the fruit. There was an irony in such a simple gesture, highlighting the transient nature of their ordeal, that a humble offering could feel like a small victory worth celebrating. The room, now quiet, contained only the soft whispers of thankfulness and the subtle crackle of honeycomb. The prophets' faces remained hidden, their presence a distant echo in the hush, almost as if they, too, were musing at the slow, unremarkable flow of human endurance amidst storm and feast. Later, as the castle's corridors grew still, the nobles set about reassigning the sleeping chambers, a process marked by mild humor and weary routines. Beds were moved, guards reassigned, and old tapestries occasionally tugged ajar to reveal glimpses of the stone walls that had weathered yet another restless night. The atmosphere held a peculiar serenity, one born not from victory, but from a shared acknowledgement of human imperfection and the simple necessity of rest. The faint sound of footsteps, the shuffling of blankets, and the distant faint hum of faint lanterns painted a picture of quiet persistence. Meanwhile, the prophets, their faces still shrouded in indeterminate light, seemed to observe with a kind of solemn patience, as if knowing that life's small rituals persisted beyond storms and marauders. In the final reflection of the morning, the surviving noble figures and their staff sat quietly, contemplating the night's trials and the humble beauty of a shared meal. The honeyed figs, now just a memory, had symbolized more than sustenance. They embodied resilience and the unspoken promise that unity could endure, even in the face of chaos. The castle's walls, silent and unyielding, reminded all that life's uncertainties were suspended in the calmness of routine, where small gestures and quiet dawns held the real weight of human patience. The blurred faces of the prophets, unseen but felt, lingered like a distant reminder that some mysteries, much like true peace, remain softly hidden in the shadows of the everyday. And so, with gentle breaths and a slow acceptance, the castle faded into its resting state, awaiting the next chapter of quiet human perseverance. In the quiet stillness of a 13th century monastery, young Aelric, an apothecary in training, had grown accustomed to the gentle routines of herbs and potions. One evening, under a sky dimmed by heavy clouds, he crossed paths with Sister Mela, a healer whose hands trembled slightly as she explained her practice of dreaming for answers. Their conversation centered on a mysterious, creeping sickness that no herbal remedy had yet subdued, and Mela whispered that dreams sometimes carried the cure, visions sent from unseen spirits, or perhaps the mind itself in its quiet search for understanding. Aelric listened, half dismissive, half curious, as shadows lengthened and the candle flickered between them, marking a fragile bridge between learned science and ancient hope. The promise of visions as a form of medicine shimmered faintly in the cool air, a fragile hope within the mundane walls of the monastery. As nights passed, Aelric watched Sister Mela retreat into her dream routines, her face often blurred in the gray dawn when she recounted visions that seemed both strange and purposefully vague. Rumors spread of villagers seeking her out, whispering of dreams that held clues to the plague's elusive nature. Yet, Aelric noticed the tension in her voice, a quiet conflict between her intuitive divinations and the cautious certainty of herbal remedies stored in the monastery's shelves. When she described a dream involving strange symbols seen in the dark, Aelric felt a flicker of skepticism. After all, what could nightly visions truly reveal? Still, he could not deny the odd comfort in her calm explanation that sometimes the mind's dreams knew more than daylight's logic. The slow conflict grew, like a quiet whisper between two different worlds of healing. One afternoon, a curious twist of irony slipped quietly into the story. Villagers, desperate for hope, began to favor tales of dream revelations over the careful, measured prescriptions of the monastery's physicians. Sister Mela's reputation grew, and her dream meetings drew more attention than the herbal medicines Aelric carefully prepared each morning. It seemed almost humorous that visions, faint, fleeting images, began to carry the weight of truth in their small community. Despite the cautious skepticism from the learned monks, Aelric's own doubts thickened as he watched the fragile boundary between folk belief and medicine continue to blur, like shadows merging at sunset. The once clear distinction between science and superstition now seemed like a game played in hushed tones and half-open eyes, softly unresolved. Later, in the quiet hours of the night, Aelric and Mela sat again beneath the flickering candlelight, surrounded by the gentle hum of distant monks chanting. She described a recent dream, the dark figure that beckoned her, revealing a hidden herb that might ease the plague, words spoken softly, as if the very act of dreaming was enough to whisper secrets of the earth. Aelric, feeling the weight of both the historic and the human in her story, recognized the patience required to listen and trust in these unseen messages. Perhaps, he thought, healing was less about certainty and more about gentle acceptance, an acknowledgement of the unknown. The meadow outside the stone walls seemed to breathe along with their quiet conversations, a reminder that time moved slowly, and wisdom often wore a muted, subdued face. In the end, the story of Aelric and Sister Mela became a quiet reflection on how humans seek meaning in the shadows, whether through learned science or the silent language of dreams. Their small community learned that healing was less a matter of clear-cut answers and more a dance of patience, observation, and humble hope. As the years passed and the plague eventually waned, folk memories persisted, not as firm facts, but as gentle stories about the night when visions and remedies met in a fragile human attempt to understand the world. Perhaps, in some quiet way, the modest dreams shared beneath the darkened sky contained all the truth anyone could truly grasp. That patience and faith, no matter how faint, shape the slow art of healing. In the hushed hours of the night, Aelric and Mela arrived at a small village where the air was thick with quiet expectancy. Lanterns flickered softly against low stone walls, and the distant sound of sheep settling on cool grass filled the dark. They had come in search of Isolde, the reputed witch, whose nightly rites were known to stir both curiosity and suspicion. The villagers, bundled in simple woolen cloaks, watched silently as the travelers approached, their faces blurred by the dim light and age's gentle indifference. It was already late, and the stillness felt like a kind of pause, an unspoken acknowledgement that something invisible either moved or was just about to begin. That night, the local monks expressed open skepticism, murmuring about ancient superstitions and the danger of trusting a woman whose face remained hidden in shadow. Peasants, listening from a distance, whispered about dreams that haunted them, visions of strange herbs, dark woods, and a faint, persistent whisper that refused to fade. As Isolde performed her rites, only faint crackles of herbs burning and the faint rustling of fabric disturbed the quiet. The flickering candlelight cast long, wavering shadows that seemed to pulse with something unspoken. Sleep grew restless, and shadows danced at the edge of their vision, hinting at truths buried beneath the surface of ordinary life, truths that might or might not belong to the witch's cryptic guidance. The dreams, which came unbidden, were as vague as the villagers' whispers, yet undeniably tinged with a subtle tension. Irony seeped softly into the night as Aelric and Mela found themselves questioning whether the herbs had truly been identified or merely imagined. Much like the mysterious figure veiled in darkness, the recurring dreams about a peculiar herb, unmarked and hidden among others, began to feel less like figments of sleep and more like faint clues, frustratingly out of reach. The villagers' fear, once dismissed as superstition, now seemed almost justified, and the cryptic warnings from Isolde's rites carried an oddly humorous weight. Was the witch guiding them towards discovery, or merely weaving more confusion? Aelric, who had come expecting certainty, experienced only a kind of sleepy irony as the boundaries between knowledge and doubt blurred in the quiet darkness. It was, in a strange way, a reminder that some truths are easier seen than found. By dawn's soft light, the air cooled and grew more contemplative as the three, Aelric, Mela, and the distant echo of villagers, settled into a tentative calm. The restless dreams had paused, or perhaps simply faded into the background of a new clarity. Isolde's face, once concealed and mysterious, now felt less like a veiled enigma and more a symbol of accepting human imperfection, a reminder that certainty often rests on shadows and partial truths. The herbs, the rites, the dreams, they all seemed to drift towards a shared quietude, much like the slow unfurling of a day's first light. In this gentle awakening, the trio found themselves pondering whether trust could grow from vague guidance, or if it required simply the patience to wait for clarity's slow arrival. Nothing was quite definitive, yet everything seemed somehow peacefully enough. Looking back, the story of that night slowly settled into the fabric of their memories, not as a tale of clear magic or foolproof remedies, but as a silent reassurance that human pursuits, whether of knowledge or reassurance, are often quietly imperfect. The villagers' fears, the monk's skepticism, and Isolde's unseen face all wove into a shared pattern of cautious curiosity, hinting that the most profound truths might simply lie in ordinary waits and small doubts. Dreams and herbs, divination and shadows, these were woven into daily life, not as guarantees, but as gentle reminders that the human task is to observe and accept, quietly and without undue haste. As Aelric and Mela continued their journey, they carried with them a softer understanding. Sometimes, trust begins with simply listening to the slow whisper of the dark, and then, patiently, letting it speak. In the quiet hum of the monastery cloisters, the healer Aelric returned with a handful of dried herbs. Sunlight touching the rough stone walls, as if approving the humble transaction. The abbot, seated on a worn wooden bench, called the group together with a slow, deliberate gesture, eyes shadowed behind a flickering candle. He demanded proof, something tangible that confirmed Aelric's story, though the herbs lay inert in their palms, silent witnesses to the day's exchange. Aelric felt the weight of quiet expectation settle around him, his shoulders slightly hunched under the gaze of unseen prophets. It was an ordinary morning that teetered on the edge of the ritual's uncertain promise, wrapped in the slow breath of hours gently passing by. Soon, Aelric was instructed to undertake a strenuous sleep regimen, lying still in the monastic cell, eyes closed against the pale flicker of dusk light, as if trying to convince the world himself that surrendering to sleep could hold some truth. Meanwhile, Isolde, with a forbidden curl of her lips, prepared her small, secret ritual, her hands trembling slightly as she drew symbols in the air, whispering softly into the darkness she was not entirely meant to enter. The tension between the sanctioned truths of the church and the clandestine whispers of magic grew almost tangible in the air, thick with unspoken warnings. The monastery's stone walls seemed to watch both acts, Aelric's silent submission and Isolde's quiet defiance, each weighed down by the uncertain shadow of exile looming nearby. It was a moment when the mundane and the mystical collided subtly, yet irrevocably. Irony settled in as the trial of sleep stretched on, with Aelric lying still, face relaxed, while the clock's slow ticking seemed to mock him. Each second, a quiet reminder of the unspoken belief that dreams might reveal truths beyond their control. Isolde's forbidden ceremony had gone unnoticed, her movements softly blending into the gentle shadows cast across her chamber walls. Her secret, a delicate whisper against the institutional silence. The abbot's stern face remained blurred in the flickering candlelight, a reminder of distant authority and the hazy line between faith and superstition. Yet, even amid this quiet conflict, the simple act of waiting, the slow, uneventful hours, brought about an odd peace, as if the monastery's ancient stones had learned to accept human imperfections without judgment. The irony was that in trying to prove or conceal, they all merely endured the mundane passage of the night. As dawn approached, a calmness settled over the monastery, with the faint light creeping in through narrow windows, casting long, gentle shadows across the stone floors. Aelric stirred slightly, a shallow breath crossing his lips, awakening to the gentle sounds of birds outside, a reminder that sleep's mystery, for all its longing, was perhaps only a quiet pause. Isolde, having completed her ritual, moved softly as she prepared her modest morning tools, glancing around her room with a mixture of relief and quiet apprehension. The abbot remained seated in his chair, eyes half closed, as if contemplating some distant, unknowable truth. The night's struggles felt distant now, like echoes of a story that had come to rest gently in the slow, sunlit silence. An ordinary day quietly resuming its slow and measured rhythm. Looking back, the entire affair appeared almost comically subdued, a testament to human patience and the persistent search for meaning in small acts of trust and secrecy. Aelric and Isolde, like many before them, had simply gone through their modest rituals, uncertain whether they would be rewarded with certainty or left with only the faint glow of hope. The monastery's walls, no longer tense with expectation, now seemed to breathe softly in the morning light, as if acknowledging the quiet truth that in human endeavors, especially those woven through dreams and doubts. There is no true proof, only the slow unfolding of daily life. These moments of quiet effort, of hesitant belief, and half-remembered rituals felt emblematic. Ordinary human stories murmuring on, softly, endlessly, in the gentle comfort of routine. On a quiet, stormy night, the abbey's stone walls seemed to hum softly with the distant crackle of thunder, while Aelric, the abbot, sat by the flickering candlelight, half dozing as the wind rattled the windows. Mela, the healer, and Isolde, the herbalist, too felt the weight of sleep pressing softly upon them, their eyelids drooping in the darkness. Yet, just as the storm reached its quiet crescendo, a strange sense of shared drowsiness descended, pulling them into a faint, collective dream. A sign, perhaps, that something unspoken urged their minds together beyond ordinary understanding. Within this dream, all three found themselves standing in the dimly lit chapel, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and ancient wood. Shadows flickered on the walls as a blurred, unseen figure of a prophet appeared momentarily, face hidden behind a veil of mist, whispering of the plague's unseen root, a cursed object buried beneath the floorboards. As their visions flickered, they could feel the cold grip of dread and curiosity, each trying to interpret the faint, cryptic clues they received. The wind outside echoed, as if mocking their efforts, intertwining the mundane and the mysterious with a quiet sense of impending urgency. Awakening with a slow, almost reluctant yawn, the trio exchanged glance, each feeling the peculiar weight of the dream lingering, an irony of sorts that such a dark revelation could come through a night so restless and quiet. Mela scoffed softly, remarking how even spirits seemed indifferent to the chaos they uncovered, while Isolde blinked at the faint glow cast by dawn's first light, clearly prepared to dismiss it as a feverish fancy. Yet beneath the surface, they knew that ignoring the vision would be foolish. The relic beneath the chapel sat untouched, forgotten, and cursed in its silent, buried existence. With the morning settling in, they converged again in the small, sunlit cloister, their voices gentle and measured, talking softly about the elements of medicine, faith, and old tales of witchcraft. Aelric, whose face was shadowed by a soft hood, pointed out that perhaps the strange dream was no accident, a sign that human knowledge alone could not uncover all truths. Mela, always pragmatic, suggested that they examine the chapel's foundation, while Isolde, with her calm instincts, emphasized prayer and caution. Guided by their combined, imperfect understanding, they prepared to investigate the ancient stones, each step quietly hoping to prevent disaster rather than meet it. As they paused to listen to the wind settle into a gentle lull, The three found a fleeting sense of quiet humor. Here they were, late at night, unraveling obstacles with simple tools and cautious hope. Whatever the curse might have been, it now rested beneath their very feet, a shared secret that none could fully see or understand, yet all could feel. The mundane act of planning, of waiting for the next step, carried the weight of human imperfection, their tentative attempt to tame the mysterious, silent forces lurking beneath. In this slow, deliberate moment, they agreed that perhaps the greatest magic was simply human patience, wrapped softly in the illusion of control. In the dim light of early mornings, the monastery's cloister was quiet, and the air carried the gentle sound of breath rising and falling with the slow rhythm of sleep. The relic, a weathered object wrapped in faded cloth, rested quietly on a nearby table, its purpose now more symbolic than divine. As the plague's grip loosened and death's shadow receded, the monks began to acknowledge that perhaps, in the depths of dreams, there were whispers of insight worth listening to, a subtle shift in their ancient understanding of healing. Aelric, the chronicler, meticulously recorded the moment, his hand steady, but his mind gradually awakening to new possibilities. Outside, the garden's faint rustle of leaves reminded everyone of the slow, persistent passage of time, unchanged by fleeting fears or superstitions. Attention grew quietly within the walls, as Mela, the healer's apprentice, introduced the monks to sleep practices that invited more intentional rest, fidgeting less, breathing deeper, and paying closer attention to the slow rhythms of their bodies. Conversations about dreams and their meanings stirred among the men, some skeptical, others willing to listen. Shadows played softly on the stone walls as evening approached, and the faint scent of herbs from her damp cloths mingled with the quiet hum of ritual. It was an ironic moment. After centuries of dismissing dreams as mere illusions, they now confronted the subtle, elusive truth that perhaps the mind's resting hours carried clues nobody dared to find before. Still, beneath their cautious curiosity, an unspoken hope flickered. Could sleep itself become a form of healing? The irony hung softly in the air as Isolde, now departing from the monastery, left behind a fragile legacy woven from both healing herbs and whispering visions. Her departure was gentle, almost unnoticed, like the falling of a leaf in a late autumn breeze. She offered no grand farewell, only a remaining impression that some truths could emerge in quiet moments when the world was at rest and shadows stretched long over the stones. Her muted presence seemed to echo the silent acknowledgement that human knowledge was, after all, limited, and that sometimes the most profound insights slipped quietly into the subconscious. The monks watched her go, their faces blurred by the dull glow of twilight, sensing that the boundaries of their understanding were subtly shifting, but unsure of exactly how or why. With Isolde gone, a calm settled over the monastery like a well-worn blanket. Mela continued to teach her peers the small, deliberate practices that fostered better sleep and quiet awareness of dreams. The relic remained on the table, now seen less as a holy object and more as a symbol of their evolving perspective, an artifact that bore witness to their slow surrender to the mysteries of the human mind. The monks moved through their routines with a softer patience, the weight of their old certainties slowly lifting in the presence of the unknown. In the stillness, there was a strange comfort, a recognition that some elements of healing could never be fully understood, only gently observed and appreciated in the muted landscape of sleep and memory. Quietly, they settled into this new, modest trust in the unspoken. Looking back, the story of those days seemed to settle into a slow, reflective rhythm, an acknowledgement that healing, much like sleep itself, was an ongoing process of quiet acceptance. The relic sat silently, a humble reminder that even in the waning light of tradition, human curiosity persisted alongside a gentle humor about its own earnestness. As night descended softly over the cloister, the monks and their students rested, perhaps dreaming of uncharted realms nestled in the far reaches of sleep's gentle terrain. The legacy left by Isolde, Mela, and Aelric was not one of final answers, but of delicate curiosity, an enduring trust in the humble, often overlooked moments of human insight and imperfect understanding. And in that stillness, there was a quiet, enduring peace. On a bleak winter morning, the monks on the mossy hilltop awoke to the gray light filtering through narrow windows, a faint chill lingering in the stone chambers. Brother Alaric, with his weathered hands clutching a cup of cold, bitter tea, gazed thoughtfully at the flickering shadows cast by their single candle. The long nights of winter stretched endlessly, and in this quiet, frozen moment, the familiar rhythm of night vigil seemed distant and almost unnecessary. The monastery's rhythmic cycle, once steady and predictable, now felt fragile, like a candle wick trembling in the draft of shorter days. Somewhere a distant bell tolled softly, but inside only the faint scratch of pens and the slow turn of pages kept the air from complete silence. It was as if humanity's ancient sleep had begun to waver, questioning the perpetual cycle of waking and resting that had endured for centuries. As the days grew shorter and darkness settled early, the monks found their nightly vigil fragmenting into smaller moments. Brother Alaric, eyes half closed over a sheet of parchment, noted how the absence of daylight shifted their schedule. Prayer, work, and study now fractured into irregular parts of the night. The flickering candlelight threw wavering shadows across the worn wooden desks, elongating their forms in a strange, exaggerated dance. There was an almost comical irony in their attempts to maintain old routines, like trying to hold onto sunset memories with candle flames that refused to cling long enough. The thick stone walls seemed to absorb the creeping quiet, muffling the hum of activity and turning their rhythm into a slow, uncertain pulse. Through it all, the monks adjusted, quiet observers of their own small, peculiar hardship, each hope for returning light softened by the slow passage of time. Gradually, the humor of their predicament began to surface, a shared, slightly tired smile at the absurdity of their new sleeping pattern. Brother Alaric, stretching stiff limbs under a weak glow, chuckled softly at a misheard prayer, the words lost in the dimness. Their once disciplined night vigil now felt like a faded tradition, drifting like a ghostly echo through the stone corridors. The flickering candlelight, their only beacon of warmth, flickered more wildly, as if mocking their efforts to hold onto normalcy. Yet, amid the muted laughter and exhausted patience, there was a strange tranquility in their collective adaptation, an acceptance that perhaps the world, much like their sleep, was slowly shifting into unfamiliar rhythms. The monastery became a place of quiet resilience, where human imperfection found a kind of gentle humor beneath the solemn stone exterior. With patience, the monks settled into the gentler cadence of their new nocturnal tapestry. Brother Alaric, now accustomed to flickering candlelight in 3 separate moments of wakefulness, found solace in the rhythmic simplicity of their days and nights. Their routines, measured out in small acts of prayer, study, and labor, began to feel less like a struggle and more like a meditative dance with the seasons. The winter months, though still cold, brought a certain peaceful hum to the monastery, as if time itself was softly sighing into a more natural, less hurried sleep cycle. The blurred faces of prophets and saints on the frescoes seemed to watch over these quiet hours, their features obscured in shadow or light, remaining eternally unseen and unknowable. In this slow, measured existence, the monks learned to listen to the subtle language of the dark, finding a quiet harmony in the waning days and subsiding nights. Looking back, Brother Alaric reflected on how the shifting seasons silently reshaped human routines across centuries, weaving seasonal daylight into the delicate fabric of daily life. The once clear-cut boundaries of wakefulness and sleep, defined by the sun's rise and set, had blurred and reformed beneath the weight of winter's darkness. It was, perhaps, a humble reminder that human patterns adapt slowly, sometimes with gentle irony, sometimes with silent grace, carving new rhythms from the simplest of changes. The monastery's enduring stone walls bore witness to this quiet evolution. As the monks continued their minimal effort to understand time's gentle, unyielding passage. Outside, the cold wind still pushed against the small windows, but inside, in the gentle flicker of candlelight, life found a slower, steadier rhythm, an unnoticed but profound act of adaptation. And in this mundane shift, there was quiet dignity, a subtle acknowledgement that even the longest nights are just another part of the endless human cycle. As the days grew shorter with winter's grip tightening, the monks in their dim stone cloisters gazed out at the faint, flickering light of the horizon, knowing that the sun's daily journey was nearing its end. Inside, the flicker of oil lamps cast warm, uneven pools of amber on parchment pages and wooden desks, where scribes traded the clarity of daylight for the gentle glow of candlelight. It was a quiet time, almost lullaby-like, filled with the soft scratching of quills and the slow rustle of turning pages, as everyone settled into the slow rhythm of shorter work and rest cycles. The cold, which seeped through stone walls and chilled fingertips, invited moments of pause, long enough to reflect silently on the day's small pursuits. Yet beneath this calm, a subtle tension stirred. How best to adapt to the endless dark, how long to sleep, how short to nap, all against the ticking clock of winter night's descent. One evening, as shadows lengthened and candles sputtered in the drafty scriptorium, the elder scribe, his face veiled in the half-light, lingered over a parchment while emphasizing the importance of a single, extended rest period, believing that a long, undisturbed sleep preserved sacred order and clarity of thought. Opposite him, a young novice, with cheeks slightly red from cold and excitement, argued softly for a different approach. To divide the long night into multiple short sleeps, slipping into fleeting naps whenever fatigue beckoned, hoping to keep the manuscripts flowing and minds alert. Their quiet debate, weighted by age and curiosity, filled the room with a gentle irony. How the simplest solution could feel so elusive amid flickering flames and fragile ink. The clash of tradition and novelty was mostly measured and calm, each voice softened by the hum of the cold night beyond the narrow windows, yet undeniably hinting at the human taste for small rebellions and minor reinterpretations. Ironically, as the monks tried to impose their notions of order onto the dark hours, the lamps themselves became symbols of both progress and limitation. Oil sputtered stubbornly, shadows flickered unpredictably, and the fragile flame often fought a losing battle against the cold. The younger novice's system of frequent naps occasionally met with amused, if sympathetic, nods from some elders who had seen one or two more winters, yet stubbornly clung to the idea of a single, long rest as a form of discipline. One evening, a candle's flame finally flickered out, causing a ripple of soft, exhausted sighs, and revealing how small inconveniences could turn into quiet disputes about sleep habits that seemed almost insignificant in the grand, slow pace of medieval life. The manuscripts continued to rest open on desks, their ink drying unnoticed in the dim, warm gloom. They served as quiet witnesses to the eternal human struggle with timing, rest, and adaptation. Eventually, the tension eased, leaving behind a calm that was almost meditative, as if everyone had collectively resigned to the gentle, unhurried rhythm of winter nights. The elder's long, deep sleep was sometimes interrupted by the faint sounds of scrolling scrolls and the soft closing of a book, while the novice's brief naps left him waking with a small, contented yawn, refreshed just enough to carry on. Within this quiet acceptance, the monks found a kind of peace in their imperfect arrangements. No grand resolutions, just a continuous, unspoken understanding that human beings are small, flawed creatures, trying to find comfort in limited light and cold stone. The flickering candles, the soft whisper of breath, and the occasional shuffle of bedclothes seemed to affirm that, in the midst of cold and darkness, life persisted with gentle, understated humor. It was a slow, quiet harmony, stitched together by simple routines, and the unyielding, if mismatched, human need for rest. Looking back across the centuries, one might see these small struggles with sleep not as mere inconvenience, but as a reflection of the timeless, universal human effort to adapt. How, even in the quietest moments, choices spill out into the mundane, shaping lives in ways both memorable and mundane. The monk's unspoken acknowledgement that human schedules are always imperfect echoes through history, reminding us that patience, humor, and persistence are quietly woven into everyday existence. Their fragile candles, sputtering lamps, and casual disputes over rest measure a gentle truth that no matter how carefully plans are made, the dark hours will always have their own quiet, unpredictable rhythm. And perhaps, as the faces of prophets remain hidden in shadow, so too do the deeper reasons behind our own restless nights, quietly unresolved beneath the slow turning of seasons and the soft, everlasting hum of human life. As spring's first light stretched further into the day, the monks in the stone cloister found their routines gently disturbed by the increasing brightness. The early mornings now spilled over into longer hours of waking, and the familiar rhythm of candlelit prayers softened beneath the expanding sun, while the season's warmth seemed welcoming. It subtly challenged the discipline they had carefully maintained through darkened nights and quiet sleep shifts. The monastery abbot, seated by his wooden desk, remarked with a half-smile that perhaps even the sun was trying to cheat its way into more daylight, unsettling their sacred schedule. The routine that once felt like a refuge now felt slightly brittle, as the bright, persistent days beckoned them to reconsider their familiar rhythm. Yet, amidst this quiet change, the shadows of doubt and humor flickered softly within the cloister's silent corridors. Tensions quietly rose as the monks tried to adjust, extending their wakefulness to match the lengthening days without breaking the sacred cadence they relied on. The abbot fretted in the mornings, his brow furrowed as he watched the younger brothers stumble over their extended periods of watchfulness. He worried that the routine might loosen, with discipline fading like mist at dawn. A weary novice suggested that perhaps the sun's insistence was an unkind joke, and some older monks muttered about the chaos of skipping the cycle's natural balance. Meanwhile, a wandering pilgrim clad in simple robes and eyes shaded by a broad brow shared tales from other cloisters where similar shifts had been embraced, their routines softened by the seasons without losing their spiritual core. The notion sparked a quiet, gentle debate about resilience and adaptation, subtle as the light filtering through stained glass. Ironically, the more they struggled to preserve the familiar polyphasic rhythm under the new spring sun, the more it revealed its fragile nature, like a well-worn cloth stretched just enough to show threads fraying. The candles burned lower as the monks attempted to match their sleep cycles with daylight, but the dim flicker of their lamps seemed oddly out of sync with the cheerful brightness outside. The abbot, ever watchful, found amusement in how their careful routines were now just faint echoes, reminding himself that human effort often underestimated the plain march of seasons and light. The pilgrim, perfectly at ease, chuckled softly at the thought that perhaps the sun was just bored and playing pranks. Misty mornings, lingering shadows, and the smell of damp stone lent a quiet humor to the monastery's slow adaptation, as everyone moved in a dance of compromise. Gradually, a calm settled over the cloister as the monks learned to embrace the shifting light without surrendering their discipline entirely. They began to see the seasons change as a gentle ripple in their daily life, no longer a threat, but a part of the slow, enduring flow of time. The abbot, with less concern etched into his features, watched the brothers adjust their routines quietly, finding new moments of repose amid the extended daylight. The flickering candles became a symbol not of dwindling discipline, but of resilience and acceptance that human schedules are never truly fixed, only surrendered and renewed. The pilgrim's stories proved prophetic, hinting that similar cycles had thrived before in faith and in practice, through seasons of light and shadow. In this peaceful, unhurried moment, the monks sat in gentle silence, knowing that perhaps the greatest virtue was simply to observe and adapt, like the slow rising and setting of the sun itself. Looking back, the monks understood that the seasonal shift was more than change in hours. It was a quiet lesson in humility and patience, woven into the everyday textures of cloister life. They realized that routines, much like light itself, were fleeting and flexible, subject to the unending patience of nature's cycles. The subtle humor of their efforts to control time revealed itself in the slow, inevitable truth that humans, in their pursuit of order, often only catch glimpses of the greater flow. As they settled into this seasonal dance, the smell of mossy stone and fresh spring air mixed softly in their memories, reminding them of how they, too, could be shaped gently by the rhythms beyond their control. With a sense of peaceful acceptance, they returned to their quiet duties, eyes half closed to the lingering absurdity of human attempts to tame the endless march of seasons, confident that in the end, all things move with quiet grace. On a quiet midsummer evening, the cloister monks sat around flickering candles, their shadows dancing softly on ancient stone walls. The sky outside was clear, and the distant stars seemed unhurried, indifferent to human routines. The monks, accustomed to waking at dawn and resting after sunset, felt a rare stillness settling in as they prepared for their usual vigil, unaware of the celestial event quietly approaching. Perhaps it was the lingering warmth or the gentle hum of evening chores, but a calm settled over the group, fostering a slow sense of anticipation. Life in this rhythm had become a tentative dance with the light, routine intertwined with the quiet hope that nature's timing might linger just a little longer. Without warning, a faint and strange glow crept across the dark sky, a comet, bright and uninvited, streaking through the universe with gentle insistence. The monks paused, their candles flickering in that unnatural brightness, as a collective breath was held in the cool air. For an hour or more, their vigil extended into a silent celebration of this unexpected gift. The world outside seemingly paused in reverence. The night no longer felt like a strict cycle, but a shared moment of awe, unplanned and fleeting. In that strange, luminous quiet, they recognized that their usual schedule to match the sun's rise and fall was a fragile thing, adaptable to the whims of the cosmos. As dawn approached, the celestial spectacle faded, leaving behind a faint trace of wonder that hovered like a strange memory. The monks, back to their routines, chuckled softly at their surprise. How easily they had been caught unready for the universe's gentle, ironic humor. The unexpected vigil had woven itself into their daily tapestry, a reminder that even the most disciplined plans could bend when touched by nature's unpredictable hand. They returned to their chores, candles now unlit, their minds quietly recognizing the odd comfort in such quiet disruptions. Life, they realized, was less about rigid schedules and more about gentle flexibility, an acknowledgement of the greater rhythm of the world outside their monastery walls. In the days that followed, the monks found themselves lingering a little longer at evening prayers, gazing up at the night sky with softer eyes. The comet's brief illumination seemed to whisper an unspoken lesson that the true power lay in their capacity to yield and adapt, to listen to the subtle shifts of light and dark. Their routines adjusted imperceptibly, an extra moment here, a slightly later candlelit meal there, without fanfare or regret. The seasons drifted onward, carrying their modest ritual changes like quiet, unremarkable notes in a long, slow symphony. This slow dance with light and shadow became a gentle acceptance, an understated humility before nature's grand, indifferent design. Looking back, the monks saw that the great sleep shift was never about strict adherence, but about harmony with the world around them. When nights lengthen or shorten, or when an unexpected comet guides their vigil, the human rhythm subtly changes, quietly reweaving itself into the fabric of each day and night. Their story, simple and humble, hinted at an eternal truth, that adaptability, born of patience and shared awe, is the real strength in human routines. As they settled into their familiar, silent routines once more, the starry night's brief glow lingered in their minds, a gentle reminder that even in sleep, there is room for wonder and quiet rebellion against necessity. In a time when the length of days ebbed and flowed with the seasons, monks observing the quiet, unhurried rhythm of nature found themselves caught between the faint glow of candles and the slow march of daylight. As the comet's long-ago tale faded from memory, they began to notice how darkness and light wove into their daily lives, gently nudging their habits. Initially compelled by necessity, their sleep schedule remained rigid, but over whispered conversations in stone corridors, a subtle idea took shape to adapt rather than resist the changing hours. Days grew shorter, and so they adjusted, letting their rest drift naturally with the sun's slow retreat and return. It was a quiet surrender to celestial unknowns, an acceptance that sleep, like the seasons, could be more fluid than once thought. Yet Beneath the calm surface, a quiet tension emerged. Perhaps it was the flickering candle flames not providing enough comfort, or the occasional murmur of restless minds. Some monks, eager to squeeze more study into flickering evening hours, experimented with dividing their sleep into smaller segments, slipping into naps during the coldest, darkest spells. They swapped long, uninterrupted nights for a polyphasic rhythm that felt both innovative and oddly precarious, like balancing atop a fragile hourglass of light and shadow. The sacrosanct notion of a single, unbroken rest was gradually replaced by a pattern that seemed both modern and strangely old-fashioned, echoing an instinct to work with the sky's shifting mood. Ironically, the more they tried to tame the darkness, the more they became conscious of its gentle, persistent pull. As time meandered on, the monk's experiment revealed small, humorous truths, like how candlelight would flicker at just the wrong moment during a prayer, or how naps would sometimes turn into accidental sleeps in warm corners. Their schedules, once carefully carved into stone, now felt more like tentative sketches, drawn in the fleeting moments between chores and study. The celestial clock continued its slow, indifferent rotation, indifferent to their plans, and the monks learned to chuckle softly at their own attempts to chart the unpredictable dance of day and night. Faces blurred and shadows stretched, as prophets and sages appeared to be veiled behind curtains of shadow. Their insightful faces dimmed, but somehow more human for it. The rhythm, though imperfect, grew into a gentle rhythm, a melody of compromise between effort and surrender. With patience, the monks settled into a quiet harmony where candlelight flickered softly on parchment, and naps became woven into their routine like a familiar lullaby. They discovered that balance was less about precision and more about listening to the way their bodies responded when the outside world draped itself in darkness or dawn. The shifting seasons and celestial patterns, once external mysteries, seemed to mirror their internal adjustments, inviting a gentle acceptance of imperfection. It was an unremarkable, peaceful symphony of small human moments, a sigh after a long nap, a stretch under the warm glow of a candle, a shared glance that hinted at humor in their modest failures. In such quiet rhythms, the monks found a fleeting, yet profoundly grateful, sense of calm. Looking back, the monks seemed to understand that their sleepy experiments, like the flickering candle or the blurred faces behind shadow, were modest acts of adaptation, small, imperfect responses to the vast, indifferent universe. Their polyphasic schedule, born from seasonal necessity and human curiosity, became a humble testament to the quiet resilience of daily life. Beneath the layers of effort and irony, a simple truth lingered, that rest, much like light, obeys its own slow, unpredictable law. As they emerged from their shadowed hours into the gentle glow of understanding, they carried with them a subtle lesson, perhaps the most human of all, that harmony is less about control and more about coexistence. And so, in the slow, measured cadence of their days, the monks found a kind of peace, soft, imperfect, eternally patient.